So everybody knows that it's happening. So there's no hiding any of this. It's all above board. Hi, Jeff Marsacci, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to the video. Today we've got a good one on prenups versus trusts. What's the best way to plan just in case there's a divorce? Now, I'll give you the answer up front. It's both. These are both tools and they're important tools, but it's really critical to kind of understand what each one of them does. And I'm even going to compare it a little bit to estate planning and how that's developed over the last, say, 40 to 50 years. So first, a prenup is a premarital agreement where you're listing, okay, in the event of a divorce, here's how we unwind things for the marriage. And it's also, here's what we're agreeing to in the context of the marriage. So if you don't have a premarital agreement, you didn't sit down with separate attorneys and come to some sort of agreement and put it in writing, well, don't worry about it. The state has a plan for you. So the state is deciding what happens if your marriage breaks up. And this is where you hear all of these divorce horror stories. I can't believe the court did this. I wasn't anticipating this. This isn't what I wanted. And I can't believe I am completely getting messed over by the court system. Well, it's because you didn't take the time to actually put together, here's what it's going to look like. And the fact is, if the two of you, you're getting married and you don't have a premarital agreement and you don't agree to any of these terms, well, maybe you shouldn't be getting married in the first place. So this is a big distinction. The premarital agreement is kind of designed to be in court and used in court if there's a breakup of the marriage, so that a judge has to go and look through everything and come to a conclusion based on that prenup. Now, this is the way it kind of has to be, because a judge has to interpret it, and a judge has to grant the final divorce, and the terms, well, they have to be reasonable, but there's still that vulnerability of court to your assets. So, all right, what happens? Is there a way to kind of take those assets off the table? Well, yeah, there is. If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel. And this is something that's in my book, The Divorce Firewall Strategy. So for the book, it's going through these different components, but the big one that's not really out there a lot, there isn't a lot of information, and really this should be the revocable living trust of planning in case of divorce, a domestic asset protection trust. So if a domestic asset protection trust is a trust where it's irrevocable, you're setting it up, you're putting your money into that trust, you're putting your assets, real estate, whatever, into that trust, and there's a benefits trustee who is overseeing everything and deciding what you can get or not get, but you are the beneficiary. Now, caveat right up front, this does not work in all states, but that doesn't mean you can't set up this trust in a different state and come under those laws and jurisdictions for the property and the assets that you're putting into it. So essentially, if you've got some real estate, maybe an investment account, possibly even if you're running your own business, then you have a limited liability company or a corporate shell around some of these assets, the stuff that's actually in business, like the rental properties and your business. You've got your investment accounts that are in there. That other benefits trustee is managing all of this. And each month or at least each quarter, you're taking whatever your excess money is and you're putting it into the trust to be invested. So that it's completely off the table because you can't force the trustee to give you any of these money. So if it's in a divorce, the court really can't get to it without having to breach through say, a Wyoming trust, and if you're in any of the other states, it's really difficult to get through that. That's a whole other barrier that might not even be worth looking at. Now, if you just do that trust on its own, and yeah, I'm going to hide this from my spouse, and I'm going to put the money into this trust, and they're not going to know, and if we get divorced, ha ha ha. No, that's being deceptive, and yeah, it's still protective, but it's going to be a lot easier for a judge or judges in different jurisdictions to try to get through to it because you were being deceptive. Don't be deceptive. Just up front, when you're doing the premarital agreement, you have to reference that you have the trust. So let's go back to the premarital agreement for a bit. What is typically inside the premarital agreement? Here are the high points. One, you're each listing your separate assets so that it's all laid out. If there is a divorce, this stuff is mine, this stuff is yours, and that's it. You mention that trust. You mention that domestic asset protection trust in that premarital agreement that you're negotiating. And so it's referenced, and hey, everybody knows you're allowed to then take your income and whatever's left over after the commitments that you're paying into the living expenses and everything, it's going there. So everybody knows that it's happening. So there's no hiding any of this. It's all above board. All right, so that's the second thing I just kind of referenced. You want to list, here's how we're making expenditures for our living expenses. These are some things that I sometimes see missing from the standard premarital agreements. It's very good about, okay, this is the separate property. We're not going to have alimony. Child support's going to be according to the guidelines, set by the state, which you really can't get out of that. But sometimes I really don't see, here's how we're handling expenses. And this is something that you should be talking about in negotiating. You should each have separate attorneys. Whatever you do, don't download a form and just expect to go ahead and fill it in. And I joke, yeah, you can fill it in with crayon, and 17 years later, the situation's changed. You didn't follow half the agreements. I hear people yelling and screaming, these prenups don't work. These prenups don't work. No, that's garbage. It's because you didn't follow the actual rules. You didn't each get your own attorneys. You didn't negotiate. You didn't go through it. And you didn't follow up every 3 to 5 years and update or reaffirm the agreement. So yeah, it gets thrown out because it's not kept current. All right, so that second thing is listing those expenses. So if you're going to just, okay, everything is split 50-50 because we have roughly the same income, okay, fine. Well, wait a minute, I'm making a significant amount more than my future spouse. We're going to split these expenses maybe 65-35 or 70-30. And so you're deciding ahead what you're contributing to a joint account for those expenses and then spending. So you're going to have a budget. Maybe even as part of those expenses, you're going to agree to have a monthly budget meeting for the household to go through all of this. And look, you've got some big expenditure coming up. You decide, all right, we kind of set a percentage of our salary that's supposed to go in to handle all of this stuff, and we're going to exceed that. All right, this particular month we agree we're putting a little bit more in. No problem. It's all laid out that this is how it's going to work in that premarital agreement. So what's another thing that you're going to have in that premarital agreement, if you end up dissolving the marriage, that you're going to either, there's not going to be alimony, or there's going to be listed specifically, here's how the alimony is going to work and paid from one person to the other. You list it, and you negotiate it so that you each have your own attorney, and no one can say, oh, I was kind of forced into it. No. So that's another piece that you have as part of that premarital agreement, is listing whether or not there's alimony. Another important thing about the premarital agreement, that fourth one, you're doing your own estate planning and you're doing your own investing up until that point. So your estate plan should be listing, here's who my beneficiaries are going to be. Now, this is the important thing. In a lot of cases, if you're trying to keep everything separate, you're both working, you're both creating your own wealth on your own, then why would you necessarily want your spouse to be the 100% beneficiary of your estate plan? Or even letting them opt into, well, the state says if you die without a will, then here's the minimum that you're going to get. No. That's typically, unless it's waived, that premarital agreement better waive it. So as you move forward in the marriage, there are other ways in which to account for a spouse that stay outside the plan. But generally speaking, when we're using this kind of setup, they want it to go to the kids. They want the kids to be the beneficiaries. Potentially, your estate plan can call for how the assets are to remain in trust. You've got that separate trustee who could provide for a spouse in their sole discretion, and the kids don't actually get it until the spouse passes on. You can do that as well, but you have to put into the premarital agreement, here's how estate planning is going to work. And it's typically, nope, I do my estate planning, they do their estate planning. Great. So now what about this domestic asset protection trust? It's going to have those estate portions that are also listed. And again, usually the default, what I typically see is it's going to the children, holding pattern or not. But there's another piece to that trust which states that you, by your will, can direct where those assets go upon death so that you can make changes. Because remember, this is an irrevocable trust that you're setting up, and it's designed to last for decades. You want some way to be able to appoint your estate in a certain direction. Now, again, typical situation, it's not going to be, oh, the spouse is the 100% beneficiary, although you could. What's more typical that I'm seeing as if you're going to do this type of planning is that it's not going to the kids directly, because as the kids get older, maybe they end up in relationships that you don't necessarily approve of. You don't know or trust the spouse all that well, and you want to protect what you're leaving to your child. You can instead put into the will, okay, instead of it going directly to my kids at whatever age, we're going to set up asset management trusts. So now it goes into that trust. It's there for their lifetime and then must go to the grandchildren. Now, there's tax implications to that, generation skipping tax. I can see attorneys going, wait, whoa, wait, what are you talking about? No, there's tax considerations that go into that as well. But again, that could also be addressed in the will, that you're assigning your generation skipping tax credits over there. So don't, all the tax people, don't panic. So you can still direct it so that it's going to the kids in a protected way rather than going to them directly. So fine. So you can lay all of this out in that domestic asset protection trust, that yes, you have this power of appointment that can be exercised via your will. So other than that, in that domestic asset protection trust, you don't get to say where the assets go. But that also doesn't mean that you're completely devoid of any power, because in a lot of cases, and depending on the jurisdiction, using Wyoming for an example, you can actually be the investment advisor. So you can manage where these assets are, how things are invested. You can run whatever the business is. You can manage the LLC that's holding the rental property, and you can be the property manager. You can be the manager of the LLC and still keep complete control over it. The one thing you can't do is say, well, okay, it's my business or it's my investments, I'm going to take the money out and put it in my pocket. No, that has to be run through that benefits trustee. But that's still a lot of authority to be able to manage all of these assets that are under your control. And yet it's completely separate. It is setting up a firewall between a divorce court and the assets that you've been building up throughout the marriage. So if you are going to take the step to actually do a premarital agreement, you really should be reinforcing it by following here's how assets are to be titled, especially including that you're allowed to put this money, the excess money beyond what your obligations are, into this domestic asset protection trust that's for your benefit and your benefit only during your life. So that's how this all kind of works together. It's part of a coordinated strategy. Now, I'm always told that I have to keep plugging the book. There's the divorce firewall strategy that talks a lot more about how the trust works, how the premarital agreement works. There's a lot more on the premarital agreement and the different terms that should be listed in there and negotiated and talked about with your attorney in your jurisdiction and how it coordinates. But also, here's certain agreements. If you're going to rent a house, you need to have a good lease agreement that describes exactly how everything's going to be paid and how the living situation is going to work out. That's also in coordination with the premarital agreement. So all of it is a coordinated strategy designed to really not just protect you, but also protect your spouse and lay everything out so all the expectations are there and they can be negotiated. So look, if you're going to get married, it just makes sense to line things up, not just with the premarital agreement, because that's kind of like a will. It's, oh yeah, here's how I want things to go when I die, but it has to go into court and handle probate and all of this other stuff. You can keep the bulk of your assets outside of that court's reach, or at least its easy reach, by doing a domestic asset protection trust. So all of these tools are at your disposal if you want to go into a marriage with your eyes wide open and both of you negotiating, here's how we want things to work in the event it doesn't work out. So what's the percentage that it's not going to work out? It's about 50%. So do you really want to flip a coin and potentially lose half of your stuff because you didn't plan ahead? Or do you want to plan ahead and hope you're flipping a coin and everything turns out in everybody's best interest? So I hope you found that information useful. As I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.